Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 20th day of September now, 2022. I'm first graphic here showing, there we go. We've got a continuation of the flood watch that runs through late Wednesday night for the Copper River Basin and a portion of the eastern North Gulf Coast that includes Valdez and Cordova. And again, that's a possibility of flooding due to additional rains that may be enough to cause flooding, but it's not imminent at this point in time. And back out to the west there, that's a high surf advisory that's out tonight through noon Thursday for the Bering Strait coast, St. Lawrence Island, and the Yukon Delta coast on up into Norton Sound. And taking a more detailed look at that high surf advisory, what to expect, actually, again, for St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait coast, southern Seward Peninsula coast, eastern Norton Sound, and the Yukon Delta coast. And again, from midnight tonight through noon, Alaska Daylight Time Thursday, and that's for high surf. And impacts would be waves will wash to the top of the beach, and beach erosion will occur, especially on south-facing shorelines, but flooding is not expected. South winds of 25 gusting 40 miles an hour develop late tonight into Wednesday, with the strongest winds Wednesday causing high surf Wednesday into Thursday. And from there, going to special weather statement out for the Susitna Valley, including Talkeetna and Willow, and that's through Wednesday morning, tomorrow morning. Periods of moderate precipitation have caused rises to the Susitna River and tributary creeks and streams, including Willow Creek. Smaller rivers may see water levels at bankful, but flooding is not expected. And so from there, going on, and on a sunnier note here, at least on this picture, the autumnal equinox for the Northern Hemisphere occurs Thursday, September 22nd, 2022 at 5:04 p.m. So another way of saying that is as fall begins at 5:04 p.m. Thursday, September 22nd, and say goodbye to summer. Moving into satellite imagery, you can see clouds that brought the rain across Cook Inlet and up into the Susitna Valley and areas eastward there into Yakutat and starting to push into the northern panhandle, spreading northward up into the interior there. That's shifting eastward. As you can see, the whole pattern from south is moving south to north, but you can see it's shifting eastward, getting some hazy sunshine here in the Anchorage area and portions of Cook Inlet, and some pretty good clearing occurring over the Shelikof Strait area into Kodiak Island. And that whole band slowly edging its way eastward, but won't get too much farther east, but far enough east to keep the rain mostly in down Turnagain Arm and then into Prince William Sound, the Copper River Basin. Out to the west, you can see the next front coming out of the Russian Far East, getting pushed along by some fairly strong upper-level jet, westerly jet, pushing into the Bering Sea once again. And that's finally going to push that ridge ahead of it inland, and that's going to push that trough eastward there, and that'll push the ridge that's been keeping it nice over the Panhandle, especially the southern southeast coast. Temperatures in the mid to upper 60s each day, and Canada, that's going to push that into Canada and weaken it. So you see a change toward wetter weather there coming up. Otherwise, up along the northwest coast, trough there with that persistent low that was the big storm, now down to 1,004 millibars, but still producing some fairly decent rainfall amounts. NOAA had 1/3 of an inch, and then up at Cape Lisburne, they had about 0.8 of an inch of rain during the day today, 12-hour period ending at mid-afternoon. Otherwise, down to the south, just some scattered showers over the western interior, down to the Alaska Range, or I'm sorry, the Aleutian Range in Alaska Peninsula. And then that frontal boundary, that moisture flowing south to north there, keeping it wet. Of course, rain ended earlier today over the Anchorage area and portions of the Kenai Peninsula, starting to clear out just to the west there a little bit. And areas of rain, not all that heavy in the Copper River Basin. Heaviest rainfall amounts were, let's see, 1/3 of an inch occurred at Anchorage and also up at Delta Junction. So some of that moisture getting north of the Alaska Range there. And Yakutat picked up 1/2 inch of rain. Heaviest rainfall amount was about what Cape Lisburne had at Cordova, 0.8 of an inch. And some of that rain spilling into the northern parts of the southeast coast, but on the light side there. Otherwise, good sunshine down to the south. Again, today, temperatures in the mid to upper 60s this afternoon. And then you can see the tight pressure gradient ahead of that front that's pushing into the western Bering Sea. Tonight, that weakens a little bit there as the front pulls away from the low center, and look for periods of rain and increasing winds into the central Aleutians. A bigger increase in the winds there over the northern Bering Sea, and more rain begins to affect St. Lawrence Island later tonight. Otherwise, dry conditions. You can see the edge of that moisture field right across the central Madanuska Valley down into, say, Girdwood eastward. Most of the Kenai Peninsula dry. Look for some clearing Cook Inlet westward into the Kuskokwim Valley and northward to the Yukon Flats. Still just a risk of showers over the northern panhandle, but general increase in clouds, lowering thickening clouds over the central and northern areas. Probably some high clouds spreading over the entire southern southeast coast. And then for tomorrow, the day Wednesday, gusty winds and rain, Bering Strait and the Seward Peninsula with, again, possible gusts of 40 miles an hour, and all the way down a little bit less wind over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Winds diminish as you head south here with the rainfall slowly diminishing too. Periods of rain for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, front right on top of the Fox Islands there at mid-afternoon or so. And then a weak low into Prince William Sound. And again, rain continues, moderate to possibly heavy at times for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Copper River Basin areas, mostly the southern Copper River Basin. And a little bit better chance of some rainfall now into the northern panhandle with some showers along the central coast. Southern areas staying dry, but definitely cloudier, and isolated showers in the central interior. And then the outlook for Thursday, another low develops. That first front just troughs out, moves eastward, but that'll bring some rain even down into the Queen Charlotte Islands, Dixon entrance. Periods of rain or showers for the southern panhandle. And again, that warm front spreading moisture back to the northeast, so better chance of rain on the north coast spreading inland, and increasing rain for the North Gulf Coast as well, Kenai Peninsula. Kind of a wet day for Kodiak, becoming more showery in the afternoon. Scattered showers to sit in the valley up to the northwest Copper River Basin, Talkeetna's Alaska Range. And then that front really falls to pieces as it pushes inland there and weakens. Flow becomes more westerly and much lighter behind it, so look for a lot lighter winds Thursday along the west coast there in eastern Bering Sea, but a tighter gradient with another trough farther out to the west. A little breezy over the southern Bering Sea and Aleutians, but dry mostly with some possible sunshine in those areas, even in St. Paul. And up over the northeast interior, low clouds and fog along the Arctic coast. Lows tonight, 40s and 50s. Mid-30s, though, for the Kuskokwim Valley, Bristol Bay, upper 30s, the Sitna Valley into the 30s. And for highs tomorrow, upper 40s to lower 50s, most areas, and still lower to mid-60s possible in the southern panhandle, upper 50s to the north, followed by lows, upper 40s to lower 50s for the southeast coast, and 35 to 40 for much of the remainder of the state, lower 40s down toward Cook Inlet, mid-40s Kodiak Island, lower to mid-40s Bristol Bay, followed by highs. Again, cooler now, upper 50s for the southern panhandle, mid-50s to the north, and 40s to lower 50s over the remainder of southern Alaska. Kodiak probably 55. Up to the north, upper 20s to mid-30s for the lows tonight. Brooks Range on out, although upper 20s now into the Yukon Flats there. Lower to mid-30s for the Tanana Valley, near 40 out toward the Bering Strait. Highs tomorrow, mostly in the 40s. And then lows the following morning, upper 20s to mid-30s for the most part. Warmer out toward the Bering Strait, lower 40s there, followed by highs in the 40s to lower 50s, except upper 30s to near 40 in the Brooks Range, in the 30s for the central and eastern Arctic coast, out to the west. Lows tonight in the 40s. Highs tomorrow in the 50s, upper 40s along the southwest coast, and lows back into the 40s. Lower 40s, St. Lawrence Island, the Pribilofs, near 50 for Shemya. Otherwise, mid-40s, mid to upper 40s for the Aleutians, and then highs Mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula, central Aleutian areas, lower 50s for the Pribilofs, near 50 along the southwest coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather, areas of IFR over the northwest interior and the western Arctic coast. Big area of IFR over the upper and mid-Tanana Valley, across the Copper River Basin to the eastern North Gulf Coast, just right on the edge there, Valdez and Cordova. IFR along the central and north coast into the inside waters, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, staying VFR off to the southeast. VFR to start for Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, most of Bristol Bay over to about Togiak. Then the next band of IFR coming in from the west there, that system being pushed along by pretty good westerly flow across the western Bering Sea. IFR spreading to Atka. And then for the afternoon, that area makes a pretty good jog to the east there, covering Nunivak Island by late afternoon, as well as eastern Aleutians, Pribilofs, St. Lawrence Island, marginal VFR over much of interior Alaska, some VFR showing up over the Yukon Flats, maybe up to Arctic Village, central western North Slope, Point Lay, and south central Alaska looking pretty good into Prince William Sound for the afternoon. Kodiak Island, some marginal VFR down south, otherwise not too bad. And the Panhandle, IFR now along the central and south coast, lingering over Lynn Canal Glacier Bay to Yakutat, as well as the southern Copper River Basin and upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. For Thursday morning, some VFR showing up in the central interior from northern Cook Inlet and also for the western North Slope and Arctic coast. Otherwise, that IFR zone kind of breaking up as it comes inland, but holding together enough for a pretty good area there from the south coast of Norton Sound down to about Bristol Bay into Iliamna Lake area, western Alaska Range, and then kind of another area there over the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island down to the eastern Aleutians, and some areas of IFR along the eastern interior there, and IFR central eastern Arctic coast, marginal VFR, most of the Panhandle with some IFR now down to the south over toward Misty Fjords. And for the afternoon, that becomes VFR, southern Panhandle, IFR lingering northern Lynn Canal, and the Coast Range as well, and a little bit in the Alaska Range. Pretty good VFR breaking out now north of the Alaska Range in the eastern interior up to the Brooks Range. And improving out over the Bering Sea, just a patch of IFR northeast of Amchitka Island, northwest of Adak, and could be VFR for the Pribilofs on Alaska Island area. And for passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR for the day Wednesday, same forecast for Adigan, mostly marginal at times. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, other times VFR, the way it looks now, could trend better into the afternoon. And occasional marginal VFR for Rainy, that means VFR at times as well. Windy, optimistically, just go flat out VFR for the day Wednesday. And Isabel, kind of a marginal day there, and looks like occasional IFR possible for Mentasta. Tanita, VFR on the west side, a little bit lower conditions as you head east there into the marginal VFR. And for Portage, mostly marginal, could go VFR in the afternoon, have to wait and see. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet, North Slope Arctic coast, 4,000 feet down across the Seward Peninsula to the coast of the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island areas, and quite a gradient there out over the Bering Sea. Western Aleutians, 14 to 16,000 feet, and also another gradient there from the Copper River Basin, 6 to 12,000 feet, or actually 6 to 14,000 feet across the Panhandle. Icing, areas of isolated moderate there for the North Gulf Coast and along the north coast of the Panhandle, trying to push inland. That area extends across the Copper River Basin into the mid and upper Tanana Valley to Eagle, and then the next band kind of narrowing out as it approaches the coast there from the Bering Strait right on down a little wider for the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian areas. Jet stream, you can see a good jet, 140 to 150 knots, pushing that system eastward quite rapidly, and then it dives off to the southeast, almost a split in the flow there, but not quite. Upper level low south of the Kenai Peninsula, southwest 95 knots into the eastern North Gulf Coast. And at 9,000 feet, here westerly flow pretty good, near and just north of the Aleutians, up to 75 knots. And southwest flow, strongest mostly northern Panhandle and in the Yukon area. And at 3,000 feet, 40-knot winds blowing across the Barren Islands from the Kamishak Gap there, and 50-knot west-southwest, and turbulence along the west coast, Alaska Peninsula, all the Aleutians, occasional moderate chop.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view, and with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
This is an emergency. Please run to the nearest exit. Go to the stair tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, We have a roof, and so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecast on the south coast, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots for Wednesday. Small craft advisories on the north coast, south-southeast winds 30 knots, seas up to 12 feet. And for the southern inner waters, northwest, light at 10 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast at 15 knots. And for Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And then for the day on Thursday, small craft advisories for Lynn Canal, southeast 25 knots, southeast at 20 for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait looking at a southeast wind at about 15 knots with 3-foot seas. West winds 20 knots on the south coast there with 8-foot seas, and south to west winds on the north coast at 25 knots, seas just under 10 feet. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories Wednesday, northwest winds 25 knots with 6-foot seas. And then for the eastern North Gulf Coast, gale warnings, southeast winds 35 knots, gale warnings for the western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands for northwest winds at 35 knots, and good gale for Kamishak Bay out of the west, 40 knots, seas 13 feet, and small craft advisories for southern Cook Inlet, winds variable at 25, northwest 15, north of the Forelands. And then for Thursday, Cook Inlet, northwest winds, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, northeast at 15 for Kamishak Bay, westerlies 20 knots, Barren Islands, east 20 knots, 3-foot seas for Prince William Sound, and the North Gulf Coast, south winds 20 to 25 knots, seas topping out at about 12 feet. Kodiak Island, small craft advisories for west winds to 30 knots, and for the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds 30 knots, seas 8 feet, small craft advisories for Bristol Bay, west winds 25 knots, seas 4 feet. And for Thursday, Bristol Bay, southwest winds 20 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, west winds 20 to 30 knots. Kodiak Island, west winds 25 knots. Seas running 5 to 15 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians, we've got south to southwest winds 35 to 40 knots for the day Wednesday. Seas up to 12 feet. Southwest 35 to 40 knots for Adak and Atka. West 30 knots, Amchitka Island. Kiska to Shimia, west 25. Then the western Aleutians on Thursday, west winds at 30 knots, and the central Aleutians, west winds 25 to 30 knots, and same thing for the eastern Aleutians, west winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast, gale warnings for the Yukon Delta coast and St. Lawrence Island, as well as the Pribilofs, all south winds 35 knots, Small craft advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta coast for south winds at 30 knots, southwest 30 knots with 14-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. And then for Thursday, small craft advisories for the southwest coast, west to southwest winds 25 knots, northwest winds 25 knots for the Perblofs, and west 30 knots for St. Matthew Island. St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, winds will be out of the southwest at about 20 knots. Up to the north, kind of a variable wind pattern there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Variable 10 to 15 knots, east at 15 for the central coast, southwest 15 on the west side. Wales to Cape Beaufort, southeast winds 20 knots. And for the day on Thursday, Wales to Cape Thompson, small craft advisory, southeast winds 30 knots. And east 25 knots there for Point Hope to Cape Beaufort, and east 20 knots for the central and western Arctic coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast still kind of variable and lighter, 10 to 15 knots with 3-foot seas. For tonight, low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska keeps rain just east or somewhere in Turnagain Arm, kind of the cutoff point around Girdwood, and areas like that with heavy rain at times still possible for the northeastern North Gulf coast. Flood watch remains out for the Copper River Basin, Cordova Valdez. Possible flooding depending on how much rain you get. Next system coming across the Bering Sea, and there's high surf advisories out for tomorrow and tomorrow night for the St. Lawrence Island area, the Bering Strait coast, and for possible beach erosion. Otherwise, rain and wind start to edge inland, and it stays wet over the Copper River Basin and eastern North Gulf coast, and starting to increase the rain over the northern Panhandle. Better chance for rain across all the southeast coast later in the day Thursday. Next system increases the rain again on the North Gulf coast. Otherwise, scattered showers over south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, mostly dry in the central and northern interior. And that front coming in really weakens into a trough now. Just some light rain and shower associated with it, and a little breezy over the southern Bering Sea, but dry for the Aleutians. And up along the Arctic coast, maybe east winds 10 to 20 miles per hour on the west side, but light winds will result in low clouds and fog.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.